My weird classmate tried to brand me by pressing a sizzling hot metal crest against my skin, so I took the ultimate revenge and had him begging. 6 months later at graduation, he begged me not to mention him in my valedictorian speech. I was 13 when my parents disowned me, and it was the best day of my life, because that's when they shipped me off to an elite Swiss boarding school. You see, up until this point, my parents were abusive as hell, so even being surrounded by preppy white boys and having constant imposter syndrome was better than living at home. I thought I would be the only one that felt like an outcast. Until 3 months later, when I met my saving grace. It came in the form of a boy with a hit-up backpack and homemade haircut named Randy. As soon as he walked into the dining room, everyone went silent. I was going to ask him to sit beside me and my friends when suddenly my roommate Jake grabbed my arm. Don't. The last scholarship kid we had stole 3 Rolexes and someone's MacBook before getting expelled. I wanted to tell Jake I knew what it felt like to not belong, but I also remembered eating alone my first month before they accepted me. So instead, I just nodded and tried to tell myself that if I had to earn my spot here through hell, so did he. But what they did to him over the next few weeks still keeps me up at night. It started small. The library installed a metal detector that only he had to walk through. Rich kids would spill things on his clothes specifically because they knew he couldn't afford to replace them. And instead of fighting back, he did something even worse. He was kind. When his mom sent homemade cookies, he shared them with everyone, including the kids who tortured him. I watched him pick up a $50 bill on the floor and ask everyone who it belonged to. It was one of those high school situations when you don't know who's telling the truth, so you choose to stay out of it. But then came Legacy Week. For those who don't know, it's a week where if your parents went to the school, then you can hit up kids whose parents didn't, all in the name of tradition. I figured that if I stayed put in the library, then I'd be okay. I was walking back to my dorm at 11 p.m. when 3 Legacy students cornered me in the basement. Preston stepped out of the shadows holding the metal school crest like he'd done this 100 times before. The other 2 Legacy kids blocked my exits while he flicked his lighter open and held the flame under the metal. Every non-Legacy needs to learn their place, he said, watching the crest start to glow orange at the edges. Hold him, he told the others. They grabbed my arms and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think of anything except how much it was going to hurt. But suddenly, I heard the fire alarm go off. The sprinklers kicked on immediately, soaking everything. Preston dropped the hot metal and it hissed against the wet floor. Shh! We gotta go, one of them said. They released my arms and bolted for the exit. Through the water pouring down, I saw Randy standing by the alarm pull station, his hand still on the lever. He helped me up, and we made our way out as security guards rushed past us toward the basement. The next morning, we were called to the headmaster's office. I walked in with my head held high, thinking that Preston would finally get what he deserved, but the headmaster didn't even look at me. He just stared straight at Randy. Do you have any idea how much damage you've caused? He asked, his tone cold and assertive. The basement is flooded. Thousands of dollars in water damage. They were trying to. This is what happens when we let people like you in, the headmaster interrupted him. You can take the kid out of the gutter, but you can't take the gutter out of the kid. One more incident and you're out. Randy's shoulders dropped as he nodded. We were dismissed. But apparently, Preston is the gift that keeps on giving. Because when we left, there he was, waiting outside the room with his little paw patrol. He whispered something to Randy that made him go rigid, then walked away, laughing. Randy wouldn't tell me what he said, just hurried off alone. I tried to visit him, but he stayed in his room all day with the door locked. I was eating breakfast when everyone started running out to the hallway. I followed them, thinking there was a school shooting or something, but the crowd led to Randy's room. Inside, the campus security were turning it upside down. Randy stood in the corner with an extremely stoic expression on his face. Found the devil's lettuce in his desk drawer, the campus guard announced. By noon, Randy was expelled. No investigation, no questions, just complete exile. I found Randy that evening behind the dorms, shoving his few belongings into a garbage bag. He was crying, actually sobbing. This kid who stayed kind through everything they did to him was finally shattered. I didn't say anything, just sat there while he cried. After a few minutes, he looked at me with red eyes. You're the only one who ever tried to be decent to me here, he said, wiping his face. You deserve to know why this matters so much. He pulled out a crumpled photo from his wallet. A man in surgical scrubs standing in front of a hospital. My little sister has leukemia. In Syria, my dad could have helped her. But here, we can barely afford her chemo. I was supposed to save her. He stood up, slinging the garbage bag over his shoulder. Preston knew all this. That's what he whispered, that my sister would die before I could ever help her. Rage boiled my blood. I spent almost a year wishing someone would hit Preston into shape, but I never knew that that someone was going to be me. I watched Randy's taxi disappear into the Swiss mountain fog, then pulled out my phone with shaking hands. My thumbs moved across the screen, typing a message to Preston. You destroyed an innocent person. This isn't over. Within seconds, a laughing emoji popped up as his reply, then another, then 5 more in a row. The next morning in the dining hall, Preston held court at his usual table, surrounded by his lacrosse teammates and various legacy students. I positioned positioned myself at a nearby table, pretending to read while secretly recording on my phone. Preston's voice carried across the room as he gestured dramatically, describing how some people just couldn't handle elite education. He never mentioned Randy by name, but his cruel jokes about charity cases and people who don't belong made his meaning clear. Every veiled threat, every mocking laugh, I captured it all. Jake found me in our room later that afternoon, pacing back and forth while reviewing the recordings. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, his face serious. "You need to drop this," he warned, glancing nervously at my phone. "Preston's dad owns half of Switzerland. Banking, real estate, you name it. You can't win against that kind of money." I ignored his warning and spent that night in the computer lab, compiling everything I had. The recordings, timestamps, witness accounts I'd been gathering. I emailed it all to the school board and Randy's family, hitting send with a sense of satisfaction. The auto reply crushed that feeling immediately. "All complaints must be submitted through proper administrative channels. Please contact your house advisor for assistance." Morning assembly brought another blow. I tried logging into my email to check for responses, but the screen flashed red. "Account suspended for inappropriate use of school resources." My stomach dropped as I realized the IT department had already moved against me. Preston cornered me in an empty classroom after assembly, Marcus flanking him like a bodyguard. He held up his phone, showing crystal clear security footage of me entering the computer lab the previous night. "Funny thing about having your name on buildings," he said, his smile cold. "People are very helpful when you ask for favors." Back in my room, I discovered the worst part. All my saved recordings had vanished from my cloud storage. Every single file deleted. Marcus later admitted, almost proudly, that he'd convinced building security to let him into the computer lab after I'd left. "Just doing some late-night studying," he'd told them, and they'd handed over the access card without question. The library became my refuge over the next few days, the one place Preston's influence seemed weaker. That's where Sarah found me, sliding into the seat across from mine. She was a year older, daughter of some ambassador, with a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions in student government meetings. She leaned forward and whispered that she'd noticed my email suspension on the public system logs. "I know what Preston's doing," she said quietly, "and I want to help." Preston's retaliation escalated quickly. During lunch, his girlfriend Astrid walked past my table carrying a full cup of coffee. She stumbled at just the right moment, sending the entire contents cascading over my laptop bag. The coffee soaked through immediately, and I could hear the fizzing sound of electronics dying. Astrid's apology was as fake as her concern, delivered with a smirk that matched Preston's. That evening, I found a note slipped under my dorm room door. The handwriting was neat, controlled. "Drop this, or you'll end up like Randy. We know about your psych records from before enrollment." My blood ran cold. Those records were supposed to be confidential, documenting the therapy I'd needed after my parents' abuse. Somehow, Preston had accessed them. Sarah proved her worth the next day. She slipped me a USB drive during passing period, her expression carefully neutral. Later, alone in my room, I discovered what she'd been collecting. Her own recordings of Preston's bullying, screenshots of suspicious messages between Preston and Marcus, even some photos of Preston near Randy's room the night before the discovery. She'd been building her own case for weeks. The pressure intensified when I received an official email stating my work-study position was under review due to recent campus disruptions. Without that job, I couldn't afford the incidental fees the school loved to charge. It was another calculated move to force me out. Jake's sudden request for a room change shouldn't have surprised me, but it still stung. He sat on his bed, not meeting my eyes, as he explained. Preston's father had called his parents directly, mentioning how unfortunate it would be if their Swiss residency permits encountered any complications during renewal. Jake's family had a small restaurant in Zurich. They couldn't risk their entire livelihood. Alone in what was now my single room, I started researching. The school newspaper archives were digital, and buried in last year's issues I found what I was looking for. Another scholarship student had withdrawn after a conflict with Preston. The pattern was right there in black and white, hidden in plain sight. Preston's next move was particularly cruel. He started dating Emma, my study partner for calculus. She was the only one who understood the advanced material well enough to help me prepare for finals. Suddenly, she was too busy with Preston to meet for study sessions, always apologizing with obviously rehearsed excuses. Even the cafeteria staff seemed to turn against me. My special dietary meals, ordered due to severe allergies, started mysteriously disappearing. The workers would shrug apologetically, claiming they must have forgotten to set one aside. The nearest restaurant that could accommodate my allergies was a 20-minute walk into town, expensive and time-consuming. I tried one more official channel, scheduling a meeting with Dr. Hoffman, the school counselor. She listened to my concerns with a patronizing smile, occasionally making notes that looked more like doodles. When I finished, she leaned back and suggested I might be experiencing adjustment difficulties and paranoid ideation. It wasn't until later that I learned she was dating Preston's uncle. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During a mandatory study group for European history, I ended up partnered with Preston's roommate, Daniel. He seemed nervous around me at first, but gradually relaxed as we worked through the material. When he invited me to their room to borrow a textbook, I couldn't resist the opportunity. Randy. Preston's side of the room was meticulously organized, everything in its place. While Daniel searched for the textbook, I noticed a leather journal on Preston's desk. My heart pounded as I quickly flipped through it. The pages were filled with names, dates, and notes. Randy, Syrian, sick sister, scholarship dependent. Previous target, Alex Chen, withdrawn, March 2023. He was tracking problem students, documenting their vulnerabilities like a predator studying prey. Astrid must have noticed me spending time with Daniel because she started appearing wherever I went, asking pointed questions about our friendship. Her suspicion was obvious, and I knew she'd report back to Preston about any unusual behavior. The journal had revealed Preston's pattern clearly. Isolate the target, apply pressure through multiple channels, then eliminate them from the school. It was systematic, calculated, and had worked at least twice before. Understanding his methodology didn't make it easier to counter, though. Marcus approached me privately one afternoon near the athletic fields. He looked around nervously before speaking, his usual confidence replaced by visible guilt. He admitted he felt bad about Randy, but was terrified of losing his own scholarship. His family had sacrificed everything to send him here. I saw an opportunity and carefully showed him some of the evidence from Preston's journal, explaining how the targeting system worked. Marcus's face paled as he recognized his own name on one of the lists, marked as Potential Liability Monitor. Preston must have noticed Marcus's changing loyalty because he soon gave him a test. Marcus confided that Preston had asked him to monitor my communications, to report on who I was talking to and what I was planning. The fact that Marcus was telling me this meant something had shifted. The shift became public when Sarah stood up during a student council meeting and directly questioned why Randy had been expelled without proper investigation. The room went silent. The faculty advisor tried to shut down the discussion, but Sarah persisted, calmly listing the inconsistencies in the official story. She didn't accuse anyone directly, but her meaning was clear. Preston watched from the back of the room, his jaw clenched tight. As I walked back to my dorm that night, I felt a strange mix of hope and dread. We were building something, Sarah, Marcus, and I. We had evidence, allies, and the beginnings of a strategy. But Preston had money, connections, and years of experience destroying anyone who challenged him. The real fight was just beginning. Preston's next attempt to discredit me came through social media. Fake posts appeared on Instagram and Twitter with my name attached, spreading vicious rumors about staff members. The posts claimed I'd witnessed inappropriate behavior from teachers, complete with fabricated details that sounded just plausible enough to cause concern. Within hours, concerned parents were calling the school demanding answers. I recognized the escalation pattern from Preston's journal notes. This wasn't just about silencing me anymore. He was trying to make me radioactive, someone the school would have to remove to protect its reputation. I spent the evening documenting the fake accounts, taking screenshots of metadata that proved they'd been created recently, all from the same IP range. The following morning brought an unexpected ally. Mr. Petrov, the janitor who'd cleaned these halls for 20 years, pulled me aside after breakfast. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he glanced around to ensure we were alone. He explained in broken English mixed with German that he'd seen Preston near Randy's room the night before the substances were discovered. He'd been fixing a light fixture in the hallway and watched Preston slip inside with something in his hand. The timing matched perfectly with when Randy had been at a mandatory study session. Emma found me in the library that afternoon, her face flushed with anger. She'd discovered Preston's journal during one of their study dates, specifically the pages about her. He'd written detailed notes about her academic strengths, her family's financial situation, and how dating her would isolate me from calculus help. She'd confronted him, and his casual admission that she was just a tool had shattered any feelings she might have had. Now, she wanted to help us. I worked with Mr. Petrov to create a written account of what he'd witnessed. We made multiple copies, storing them in different locations around campus. Sarah suggested keeping one with her parents at the embassy, another with a sympathetic teacher, and a third in a safety deposit box in town. We were learning to protect our evidence better. Campus security proved useless when I tried to file a formal report. They explained that without physical evidence, they couldn't investigate retroactively. The planted substances were long gone, destroyed according to school policy. The security chief, a man who'd worked at the school for 15 years, seemed genuinely sympathetic, but explained his hands were tied by protocol. Our alliance solidified during a late-night meeting in Sarah's single room. Marcus had fully committed after realizing he was on Preston's list of potential problems. Emma brought her own recordings of conversations with Preston, where he'd casually discussed his cleaning house philosophy. We weren't just individuals anymore. We were a coordinated resistance. Research into the previous year's incident revealed disturbing parallels. The scholarship student who'd transferred, a boy from Vietnam, had experienced the same pattern: isolation, false accusations, sudden departure. His social media had gone dark afterward, but Emma managed to find an old Instagram post where he'd cryptically mentioned, "When power protects power, truth becomes irrelevant." That post went viral within our small community when Sarah reshared it. Other students began coming forward with their own Preston stories. Nothing as dramatic as false substance charges, but a pattern of casual cruelty, destroyed assignments, spread rumors, orchestrated demonstrated social exclusions. The scope was broader than we'd imagined. I fought the urge to immediately publicize everything we'd gathered. Sarah counseled patience, explaining that we needed an airtight case. One premature move could give Preston's father time to mobilize his resources and bury us. We needed to be strategic, methodical, and absolutely certain. Preston's father's sudden campus visit raised red flags. Officially, it was for a routine donation meeting, but the timing was too convenient. He toured the campus with the headmaster, his presence a clear reminder of the family's financial influence. Several board members joined them for lunch, and Preston made sure to be visible at his father's side, the perfect son. Marcus took a significant risk by recording Preston during a lacrosse team meeting. Preston, feeling safe among his teammates, bragged about maintaining the school's standards and keeping out those who didn't belong. His casual racism and classism were on full display as he explained how certain people just weren't meant for elite education. Several teammates looked uncomfortable, but none challenged him. Astrid's defection came as a shock to everyone, including Preston. She'd found her own name in his journal, complete with notes about her family's connections and how to leverage them. The realization that she'd been manipulated from the start of their relationship hit hard. She brought us Preston's backup files, which he'd foolishly given her access to when he needed help organizing his college applications. Preston's attempt to buy my silence was almost insulting in its transparency. He approached me after dinner, offering to ensure my graduation with honors if I dropped everything. He could make my college applications shine, he promised, with recommendation letters from board members and alumni. All I had to do was stop investigating and convince the others to do the same. My refusal clearly surprised him. He genuinely believed everyone had a price. The files Astrid provided revealed the true scope of Preston's operation. He kept detailed dossiers on dozens of students, categorizing them by threat level and vulnerability. Screenshots of embarrassing social media posts, academic struggles, family financial information, health issues. He'd been building leverage for years. It was blackmail material, pure and simple. We discovered Preston's control network was smaller than it appeared. Beyond his core group of wealthy legacy friends and a few key administrators, his influence relied mainly on fear and assumption. People assumed he had more power than he actually did, and that assumption became self-fulfilling. Once we started mapping his actual reach, gaps became apparent. Marcus's insider knowledge proved invaluable when he revealed Preston kept his most sensitive files on an encrypted cloud service. He'd memorized the password after watching Preston type it repeatedly. We accessed a treasure trove of communications, including emails between Preston and his father discussing problem students and how to handle them. Sarah's parents' concern reached the school board through diplomatic channels. As ambassadors, they couldn't directly interfere, but they could express worry about bullying patterns affecting their daughter's education. Other parents began asking similar questions, especially after parents' weekend revelations spread through family networks. Our alliance grew stronger through adversity. Late-night strategy sessions in Sarah's room became a refuge where we could speak freely and plan our next moves. We shared our own stories of feeling like outsiders, and I realized none of us really fit Preston's definition of who belonged at the school. That shared experience bonded us. I maintained my principles even when tactical advantages presented themselves. The embarrassing information Preston had collected on innocent students could have been useful leverage, but using it would make us no better than him. We agreed to focus only on evidence of his wrongdoing, not collateral damage to others. Preston's composure began cracking under pressure. During gym class, when someone mentioned Randy's name, Preston snapped that Randy had gotten what he deserved. Several students heard the comment, and word spread quickly. His mask of plausible deniability was slipping. 5 independent witnesses came forward confirming they'd seen Preston near Randy's room that night. 2 were legacy students who'd remained silent out of fear but couldn't stomach what had happened. Their testimony carried weight because they had nothing to gain and potentially much to lose by speaking out. The lacrosse team's gradual distancing from Preston became noticeable. After Marcus shared the recording of Preston's standard speech, several players began questioning whether they wanted to be associated with those views. Team cohesion fractured as moral lines were drawn. Teachers began noticing patterns they'd previously overlooked. The scholarship students Preston targeted consistently left school, always under suspicious circumstances. Faculty meetings grew tense as educators questioned whether they'd been unknowingly complicit in systematic discrimination. Sarah's connection with an education advocate who tracked boarding school issues opened new avenues. This advocate had been documenting similar patterns at elite institutions across Europe. Our situation wasn't unique, but it was one of the most egregious examples they'd encountered. Preston's desperate attempt to regain control led to revealing conversations. Cornered in the dining hall by questions about Randy, he declared that his father expected him to protect their traditions. The admission that this was about more than personal power, that it was systematic and generational, chilled everyone who heard it. Sympathetic teachers began their own documentation of Preston's behavioral patterns. They couldn't officially act without administrative support, but they could create records that might prove useful later. The French teacher, who'd taught both Randy and the previous expelled student, student, seemed particularly determined to help. Preston's options narrowed as more students refused to participate in his schemes. His usual tactics of intimidation and bribery failed when people realized they weren't alone in opposing him. The collective resistance made individual targeting harder. Mr. Petrov's revelation about the staff holiday fund exposed another layer of corruption. Preston's family donated generously each year, with implicit expectations of loyalty and silence. Staff members who'd benefited felt compromised, caught between gratitude and growing unease about what they'd overlooked. I chose to show kindness where Preston showed cruelty. When his younger brother struggled with advanced mathematics, I offered tutoring despite our conflict. The boy was nothing like Preston, shy, studious, and clearly uncomfortable with his family's methods. Through him, I glimpsed the pressure Preston faced to maintain family traditions. Staff members from across campus shared stories during informal gatherings. The maintenance crew, cafeteria workers, and grounds staff had all experienced Preston's casual dismissiveness and occasional cruelty. These stories, while individually minor, painted a picture of someone who saw service staff as beneath consideration. Preston's attempt to turn Emma against me backfired spectacularly. She revealed she'd been recording their conversations for weeks, ever since discovering his journal. His manipulative tactics, casual admissions, and derogatory comments about other students were all preserved. Her technical skills in editing and organizing the recordings proved invaluable. The headmaster's secretary witnessed a crucial interaction between Preston's father and her boss. The father's threats about reconsidering family donations if the situation wasn't handled properly were barely veiled. She couldn't record the conversation, but documented it immediately afterward in detailed notes. Parents' Weekend became a turning point as multiple families learned about Preston's systematic targeting. Students who'd remained silent finally told their parents what had been happening. The revelation that their children had been living in fear of one student's power shocked many families who'd assumed the school provided a safe environment. Our alliance compiled everything into a comprehensive dossier. Testimonies, recordings, documentation, and evidence filled hundreds of pages. Sarah's organizational skills created a clear narrative that showed not isolated incidents, but systematic abuse of power. We made multiple copies, storing them securely. The board meeting scheduled for the following week would vote on new scholarship policies. Preston's father chaired the committee proposing stricter requirements and easier expulsion procedures. The timing wasn't coincidental. This was their attempt to legitimize what they'd been doing unofficially. During morning assembly, Preston's usual confidence wavered as he noticed allied students sitting together. The visual representation of unified opposition clearly unsettled him. His typical smirk faded as he realized his isolation tactics had failed. I grappled with the moral implications of our actions. Victory would mean destroying Preston's future the same way he'd destroyed Randy's. Despite everything, I couldn't take satisfaction in that prospect. We were seeking justice, not revenge, though the lines sometimes blurred. My final attempt at mercy came through a private warning to Preston. I explained that comprehensive evidence existed and offered him a chance to make amends. He could admit wrongdoing, support Randy's reinstatement, and work to change the system he'd perpetuated. His laughter in response sealed his fate. Faculty rebellion erupted during a staff meeting about the proposed scholarship restrictions. Teachers who'd remained silent for years finally spoke out, refusing to support policies that would institutionalize discrimination. The usually controlled environment devolved into heated arguments about the school's values and future. Truth spread through careful one-on-one conversations rather than public accusations. This grassroots approach prevented Preston's father from mounting an effective counter-narrative. By the time he arrived for emergency damage control, the story had already permeated the entire campus community. Preston's desperation led to his biggest mistake. While his father met with administrators, Preston attempted to plant contraband in my room, but Marcus had warned me, and I'd set up a camera to record the attempt. Security footage also captured him entering my room with a suspicious package. The evidence was overwhelming. When campus security reviewed the footage, even they couldn't ignore such blatant criminal behavior. Preston's attempt to frame me had instead created undeniable proof of his methods. The very system he'd manipulated for years had finally turned against him. The former scholarship student from Vietnam agreed to testify about his experience through a video call. His hands shook as he described the systematic harassment, the planted evidence, and the pressure that forced him to withdraw. Sarah's parents arranged the secure connection through embassy channels, ensuring Preston's family couldn't trace or intimidate him. During the emergency board meeting, Preston's father withdrew his donation threat after seeing the compiled evidence. Board members who'd previously deferred to his influence suddenly found their spines when confronted with documentation of criminal behavior. The atmosphere in the conference room shifted palpably as they realized their liability in enabling systematic discrimination. My original friend group gradually reunited around me as truth spread across campus. Students who distanced themselves out of fear began approaching with apologies and offers of support. The dining hall dynamics changed overnight as Preston's usual table emptied, leaving him isolated with with only his most loyal followers. Randy's host family in town offered to provide character testimony about his exemplary behavior while living with them. They'd been horrified to learn about the false substance charges and wanted to help clear his name. Their willingness to stand up against the school's most powerful family inspired other community members to speak out. The Alliance presented our evidence compilation to the parent committee during their emergency session. Sarah's organizational skills shone as she walked them through the systematic targeting, the planted evidence, and the institutional corruption that enabled it. Parents who'd assumed their children were safe at this elite institution left the meeting demanding immediate action. Preston's mother arrived on campus after reviewing the evidence at the parent meeting. Her confrontation with her husband in the headmaster's office could be heard through the closed door. She demanded he stop protecting their son from consequences, threatening to expose everything publicly if the family continued obstructing justice. The documentation proved a clear pattern of targeting scholarship students over 3 years. Each case followed the same methodology: isolation, pressure through multiple channels, false accusations, and forced withdrawal. The board couldn't ignore such systematic discrimination when presented with comprehensive evidence. Emergency votes during the board meeting resulted in unanimous decisions to review all scholarship student departures from the past 3 years. The liability concerns alone forced action, as parents threatened to withdraw their children and pursue legal remedies if the school didn't address the systematic abuse. Preston's father made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. He threatened to use his connections to destroy my future, claiming he could ensure no university would accept me. His voice carried through the hallway as he ranted about ungrateful scholarship students who didn't understand their place. Several elite universities mysteriously lost my applications over the following days. Admissions offices claimed technical difficulties or missing documents, but the pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. Preston's father's influence reached farther than we'd anticipated, though not as far as he'd hoped. Alliance members received anonymous threats about their own secrets being exposed. Marcus found notes warning about his family's immigration status, while Sarah received messages about her parents' diplomatic assignments. The desperation behind these threats revealed how cornered Preston's family felt. Marcus wavered briefly under the pressure when his parents called, terrified about potential deportation. But after a long night of reflection, he stood firm, recognizing that giving in would only perpetuate the cycle of abuse. His courage inspired others who'd been similarly threatened. The education advocate Sarah's parents had connected us with prepared to release everything publicly if the board didn't act decisively. This threat of external exposure finally motivated the administration to move beyond damage control toward actual reform. Before we could execute that plan, Preston made his critical error. He attempted to intimidate Sarah's diplomat parents directly, not realizing the diplomatic immunity and international implications of threatening embassy staff. This overreach triggered mandatory reporting protocols that took the situation beyond the school's control. Sarah's parents' formal complaint through diplomatic channels triggered an automatic review of all recent expulsions. The Swiss Education Ministry couldn't ignore potential discrimination at an institution hosting international students. The investigation expanded beyond what Preston's father could influence or control. Preston denied everything during his board hearing, claiming we'd orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy against him. But faced with security footage, witness testimony, and his own journal documenting systematic targeting, his denials rang hollow. Even his father's lawyer advised accepting a negotiated resolution. The email review mandated by the diplomatic complaint revealed Preston's father's own communications about maintaining standards and protecting traditions. His messages to board members explicitly discussed keeping out students who didn't fit their vision of the school's culture. These communications proved institutional corruption beyond just Preston's actions. Astrid provided the final crucial evidence when she handed over Preston's journal to the board. His handwritten notes about targeting vulnerable students, complete with detailed plans for each victim, removed any possibility of claiming ignorance or misunderstanding. The board members' faces paled as they read his methodical documentation. The moment of choice arrived when the board offered options: pursue criminal charges with uncertain outcomes, or accept a comprehensive resolution that included Randy's reinstatement, clearing all affected students' records, and implementing systemic reforms. The decision weighed heavily on all of us. I demanded specific conditions for any agreement: Randy's full reinstatement with his scholarship restored, official apologies to all affected students, clearing of all disciplinary records, and structural changes to prevent future targeting. The board, eager to avoid criminal proceedings and publicity, agreed to every demand. Preston's family accepted the terms to avoid media exposure and broader investigation. Their lawyer negotiated quietly, recognizing that criminal charges for planting substances and systematic harassment would destroy Preston's future entirely. The agreement included Preston's immediate withdrawal and his family's commitment to funding expanded scholarship programs. Preston's last manipulation attempt came during the final meeting. He claimed I'd orchestrated everything out of jealousy, that I'd manipulated evidence evidence and turned people against him. But surrounded by witnesses to his behavior and faced with his own documented cruelty, his accusations fell flat. Even his core supporters abandoned him as the evidence became undeniable. Legacy students who'd participated in his schemes distanced themselves, suddenly claiming they'd always felt uncomfortable with his methods. The speed of their betrayal revealed how shallow their loyalty had been. Randy returned to campus 3 weeks later, his full scholarship restored and his record cleared. The school honored his original acceptance to Yale's pre-med program, and the admissions office confirmed his spot remained available. His quiet dignity during his return impressed everyone who'd witnessed his unjust expulsion. Preston withdrew from school without fanfare, his family's lawyers handling all arrangements. As part of the settlement, his family endowed a new scholarship fund specifically for Syrian refugees, though they insisted on anonymity. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the full story. The headmaster announced his early retirement at the end of term, citing personal reasons. Several key administrators who'd enabled the systematic discrimination found themselves reassigned or encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere. The old guard's departure opened space for genuine reform. New policies implemented comprehensive protections for scholarship students, anonymous reporting systems, mandatory investigation protocols, and oversight committees with student representation replaced the old system of deference to wealthy donors. The changes came too late for Randy's suffering, but would protect future students. The Alliance members found ourselves elected to various student leadership positions as our classmates recognized our role in exposing the corruption. I won the student body presidency on a reform platform, supported by a coalition of scholarship students, international students, and even some legacy students who wanted genuine change. 6 months later at graduation, Randy delivered the salutatorian address. He spoke eloquently about resilience, justice, and the power of standing together against systematic oppression. His acceptance to Yale Medical School had been confirmed, and his sister's treatment was progressing well thanks to an anonymous donation that we all knew came from Preston's mother, who'd been horrified by her son's cruelty. The Alliance members remained close throughout our remaining time at school and beyond. Sarah went on to study international law, inspired by her role in seeking justice. Marcus earned a full scholarship to MIT, his confidence restored after standing up to power. Emma pursued journalism, determined to expose systematic injustices. Mr. Petrov received recognition for his courage in speaking truth to power, and the staff felt empowered to report wrongdoing without fear of retaliation. The school transformed gradually, but genuinely. Merit began mattering more than money, and diversity became a strength rather than a target. The metal detector in the library was removed, and the toxic traditions like Legacy Week were abolished. We'd proven that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, but building a better future for those who come after. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I thought about that scared 13-year-old who'd arrived here fleeing abuse, and the terrified boy who'd pulled a fire alarm to save me from Preston's cruelty. Randy and I had both found our place not by conforming to their standards, but by refusing to let injustice stand. The school that had tried to break us had instead forged us into people who could change it. Preston's family continued donating to the school, but their influence had clear limits now. The board had learned that protecting abusers carried too high a price, and that true excellence meant creating space for all talented students, regardless of their background. It wasn't a perfect ending. Preston faced no criminal charges, and the trauma he'd inflicted couldn't be erased. But we'd broken the cycle, exposed the system, and ensured that no future Preston could operate with such impunity. The most satisfying moment came in a quiet conversation with Randy after graduation. He thanked me for fighting for him when he couldn't fight for himself. I reminded him that he'd saved me first, that night in the basement. We'd both learned that standing up to power was possible when people refused to stand alone. That lesson, more than any diploma, was the education that mattered most.